Welcome back. The next strategy that we will cover is called the what if consequence wheel. Social studies are full of what if moments. There are many events in our social studies curriculum that could lead to rich discussion about what would have happened, what would have been the consequences had a decision been made, or had a decision not been made. So this strategy is utilized to help students take acquired content, materials, and resources and apply it in a manner that will strengthen their ability in analyzing primary and secondary sources, comparing and contrasting multiple sources, recognizing bias and various points of view, differentiating between direct and indirect causation, developing a structured way of brainstorming the direct and indirect consequences of a decision, event, or trend, developing a process to make informed decisions and productive choices, drawing inferences and making predictions, clarifying and exploring the many facets of an issue by engaging in discussions that do not seek win-lose resolutions, and providing students with a process for evaluating the consequences of actions taken by people and institutions. In your teacher's manual, you will see the standards that are covered by this strategy. The materials are rather simple. You'll just need primary and secondary sources and the what if consequences wheel organizer. Background and preparation. Consider 2 or 3 what if questions regarding a particular lesson or unit of study. And a what if question is a question that can be used in the context of determining consequences or impacts of an action or inaction. If the class is examining the war in the Pacific in 1944 and the teacher asks, what if the United States decides to drop an atomic bomb on Japan? A what if question could also predict outcomes of a hypothetical situation or decision that is about to be acted upon. What if the United States decided to make the second Tuesday in November a federal holiday? You want to also consider that your students will most likely respond with direct consequences, and so it's important in this activity that they also consider and examine indirect consequences as well. And this will take some guidance on your part to begin with in your initial introduction of this strategy. So you'll want to select a what if question that will present students with direct and indirect consequences, and the question has to be plausible. What if Elvis Presley had been a woman is not acceptable. What if everything was free? That's not plausible. So that is not an acceptable what if question. An example of an acceptable what if question: what if the draft age during the Vietnam War had been 21? What if the Crusades had been won by the West? What if President Lincoln had not been assassinated? Those are examples of acceptable what if questions. So you will want to go over consequences with students. Now, the first time that I introduced this particular strategy to my students is during the first week of school, when we are going over rules and procedures and in the classroom and policies in the classroom. I give them I choose one procedure, and I give them a what if question. This helps them see the direct consequences, both the positive and negatives, and also the indirect consequences. This is when I go over those direct consequences and indirect consequences as well. So you may want to do something that is not involved in your curriculum to introduce this in a fun way. That's an example of one. You're going to provide the students with several examples to get the point across. Use some examples that directly relate to them. This goes back to that me introducing it the first week of school with policies and procedures. And you want them to turn to their neighbor and identify one positive and one negative that would answer the what if question. And after you do that, then you're going to discuss with the students that these consequences can be direct or indirect. This is when we get into that. Then you'll divide the class into groups of 3 or 4 students. This lesson can also be done individually. I know a lot of times there are students in the class that do not like to work together, so it's okay to do it individually. You want to give them a copy of a blank consequence wheel, and then you will provide them with a what if question. Each outward radiating section of the circle place one consequence of the issue or statement, and have the students place a positive or a negative sign in the segments that denote a positive or negative consequence. Now, when you're doing this, it's ideal to have equal amount of positive and negatives, but you can use this wheel in any way you would like. And the capital D or capital I for direct or indirect consequence. A new consequence is then considered for each of the statements from the inner radiating section. So this is your more complex wheel. So you've got another ring. So for each statement on that inner ring, you want to have a positive and negative on the outer ring. And then you can extend that activity to ask similar questions and have students make predictions. So assume the United States decides to send troops into Africa in 25 years. What are some of the possible consequences of that decision? So this will help the students take something they've learned from history and then apply it to something in the future. This strategy is very effective to use when you're discussing controversial issues in the social studies classroom. Okay, so this is our what if consequences wheel. And these are the procedures for this. In my classroom, this strategy is first introduced the first week of school. I've chosen 3 or 4 strategies that I use when I am going over policies and procedures in my classroom, and this happens to be one of those. When you're looking at this template here in the center where you see what if Germany had been the first to develop the atomic bomb, I use, on the day that I go over classroom rules, classroom procedures, we do a group activity with a consequence wheel, and the question is, what if you could go to the restroom at any time you wanted to? Or what if there were no rules? I pick a rule, or just do a broad what if there were no rules question, what if question, put it in the center. I divide my students up, and they talk together in groups. They have a piece of paper. They do not have the wheel at first. They just list answers to that what if question after they've brainstormed with each other. Then after partners, then they get into groups, and as a group, they have to come up with 6 answers. And I tell them, give me 3 positives, 3 negatives. This is just to practice and get into their mindset a positive consequence and a negative consequence. Because in this particular situation here that you see before you, what if Germany had been the first to develop the atomic bomb? You might not can come up with a lot of positives. For your students may not be able to. But always try to make it half and half. And as you see on this template, I've circled the positives and the negative sections for my students to write in. Then we go through as a group and we list our positive and negative consequence, and then we talk about the difference between a direct consequence and an indirect consequence, and we label those with the D and the I. On the extended version of the what if consequence wheel, then you would have the outside, you would have an outside ring, and for each statement on the inner ring, you would give a positive and negative consequence to that particular statement that you have. This is a great making them. This is a great strategy for discussion. It is also a great strategy if you want to talk about controversial issues. I know a lot of us are in school communities where you know, if you're presenting a controversial issue, you feel like you are walking a tightrope to make sure that you're not going to say anything that could get a lot of negative parent feedback. So I found that this what if consequence wheel, then you can dive deeper into controversial issues because it's basically student led. But this is a great way to have grand discussion with your class as a whole, and help them to think like a historian, help them to think about consequences, direct and indirect, of decisions that have been made through history, and the effects that those decisions have had or could have had they not been made throughout history. So this is the what if consequence wheel.